Political economist Mandla Lionel Isaacs believes that South Africa's response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine exposes the moral and strategic incoherence of our foreign policy. In his opinion piece, Isaacs says in international relations, there are no permanent friends or enemies, only interests. He's urged citizens to take more careful interest in international affairs and pressure government to pursue a foreign policy that reflects our interests and values. Well, he joins me now to take that conversation further, and that piece published in the Daily Maverick. Mandla, good evening. Thank you for your time. Before we get into the specifics of how we relate with Russia, let's start on a broader question. There's been this debate about whether or not there's confusion about where we stand on the conflict in Ukraine. The suggestion is that the initial statement by DERCO was quite clear. We urge Russia to pull out all its forces from Ukraine immediately, and then all the other stuff about dialogue. And then days later, you simply couldn't, no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't get President Ramaphosa to repeat those words that say Russia must pull out. And cherry on top, when a resolution was before the General Assembly at the UN that calls for exactly what we had called for on day one of the Russian invasion, we simply abstained and didn't take a position on it. So from your position, are you any clearer as to what our exact position is? Is there confusion? Is there no confusion, as government keeps telling us?
Well, I'm not confused, and good evening to you, Thulas, and to the viewers. I'm not confused, but it's fairly simple. The South African government, our government, is trying to thread a difficult needle. It's fully aware that what Russia is doing is in complete violation of, international law and international norms and the UN Charter, its letter and its spirit. You simply cannot invade another country and occupy its territory because you have security concerns. That's the reason we have a United Nations and a Security Council, so that countries can resolve security concerns or other differences diplomatically. But the government at the same time wants to avoid condemning or, publicly in the international stage, contradicting the Russian Federation, who is essentially, and what this is exposing is that we have positioned ourselves as Russia's junior partner in global politics. And so the government is trying to manage those two competing objectives.
Before we talk about, that role perhaps as junior partner, positioning ourselves as junior partner to Russia in international affairs, why do you believe government doesn't want to, condemn on a public platform the actions of Russia? And I ask you because I heard Clayson Monyela speaking on 702 a few days ago, talking about asking what purpose would that achieve, condemning. And when I saw how we abstained at the UN vote, it then suggested to me that we perhaps could have found the call for a withdrawal palatable, but we were not so comfortable with the strong condemnatory language that was being used. And to add to that question, do we have evidence that in as much as we don't want to condemn in public, that we are actually using whatever access we have, whatever influence we believe we have on Russia to sort of work behind the scenes?
Thulas, I'll be perfectly honest with you. The parsing about the words, we don't like this particular word, it's really just an excuse to get out of taking a clear stand, which countries like Brazil, also a BRIC partner, has taken, because Brazil has taken the position it's no one's junior partner. BRICS is a club for economic cooperation, but it is taking the stand to say we don't want to live in a world where strong countries can invade weaker countries whenever they feel like it. So we've refused to take a stand like most African countries have, like Ghana and Kenya clearly did and have shown leadership on the international stage. But even more importantly, Thulas, What South Africa says matters. So let me think about if under apartheid, when we were the victims of injustice and we were asking other countries in the world to not trade with the apartheid regime, to put them under pressure. When we went to bodies like the UN, my father, Henry Isaacs, represented the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania at the UN specifically to gather international countries to condemn what the apartheid regime was doing. Now imagine if those countries said, we hear you saying that there's injustice, there's brutality that is being meted out to Black people in South Africa, but we don't like this particular word of condemn. Is there a softer way that you can give us a resolution? It's ridiculous. It comes down to one thing and one thing only. The government does not want to offend the Russian Federation. And what Brazil, the example of Brazil has shown, who is quite comfortable saying, yes, I'm your BRICS partner, but that does not mean I'm going to throw international law and norms out the window. What you're doing is wrong, and we have no problem voting for this resolution because they're an independent and non-aligned country. But we are scared to offend Russia, which demonstrates that I don't think many South Africans knew that we are the junior partner to Russia on the global stage, and that therefore we cannot contradict them.
Mandla, in your piece, you then go on to say that our worldview is profoundly shaped by the legacy of Western colonialism in Africa. As such, we are most skeptical, to say the least, of Western powers who dominated and looted Africa and forged the international political and economic system in their favor. Link that to Russia's specific support, well, the USSR's specific support for, the liberation movements in South Africa. Do we remain beholden to them, and should we?
So, our foreign policy reflects the ANC's worldview. And the ANC's worldview is that, there is essentially a Cold War era worldview that, the Western powers are imperialist and racist and seek to dominate the rest of the world economically and in other ways. And then the progressive forces of the world need to line up against them. And so, that is the reason why the ANC is instinctively wants to, kind of be on the Russian side of things and puts that sort of alignment of, oh, well, if the West is on one side and Russia's on the other side, then we must be on the Russian side. Or if in this case, it would be embarrassing to say, well, actually, we agree with Russia's doing, then we'll kind of try to be on the fence and not, upset Russia. But it reflects an outdated, in my view, Cold War idea of alignment, even though, frankly, we are, we have partnerships with countries all over the world. And that's why, you quoted me as saying, the classic political science and international relations adage that countries should have no permanent friends or permanent enemies, only interests. It's one thing to have a friendship, but you also have to think about, well, what are my interests politically, economically as a country, and which relationships advance those interests? And so in my view, our strategic interests are not advanced by being Russia's junior partner on the world stage. It's not to say we should not have relations with Russia. It's not to say that we cannot trade or work with Russia, but it's to say, at what point have we decided that, all of Russia's battles are our battles, that we cannot call out when Russia is doing something that is wrong? And ultimately, is this in our interest? And in my view, it is not.
And lastly, Mandla, you suggest in your piece there that these ties with Russia, historic as they may be, long established as they may be, we drew even closer in the last decade or so. And you cite really interesting examples. For instance, Russia becoming the place where some of our politicians go when they're not feeling well.
Yes, I mean, that shows, the amount of trust and closeness between our presidency and the Kremlin. But I would just ask you, Thulas, I mean, if you look at our political objectives on the world stage, we have our moral authority. The reason why, countries around the world want to know, well, what does South Africa think? it is because of our liberation struggle, and we have a reputation for advancing democracy and human dignity. And our moral authority is damaged by this. It's not clear that Russia has advanced our political objectives, such as reform of the UN Security Council. Russia has no interest in expanding the amount of countries that have permanent membership. We do vastly more economic trade, despite the nuclear deal and the many BRICS summits. We do 20 times the trade we do with Russia, with the so-called West. So, this closeness that the ANC has with the Russian Federation has very little to do with any kind of sophisticated or objective analysis of, what South Africa's interests are. We as a country are merely taking a back seat to the ANC's kind of Cold War nostalgia of its friendship with the former USSR.
Sure, Mandla, thank you. I've got to thank you for exercising our minds on this particular issue, and that last point you make, particularly around Russia not really championing as much our agenda for reform of the UN Security Council. I think that's a really strong point, because we also have our own agendas that we actually would appreciate assistance and support in as far as those agendas are concerned. That's Mandla Lionel Isaacs. He's a political economist, public policy analyst, and Mason Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He was weighing in specifically on a specific narrow issue around South Africa's stance in the Ukrainian situation. And